33. Question 33. And we read together the question, what is adoption? Adoption is an act of God's free grace whereby we are received into the number and have a right to all the privileges of the sons of God. This is part of the benefits that we read of in the question 31, which are listed as those who are effectually called do in this life partake of justification, adoption and sanctification, and the several benefits which in this life do either accompany or flow from them. So this is the second in that list. I think we might have mentioned last week that God could have just forgiven us, but He did not do only that. He justified us. He declared us positively righteous for the sake of Christ. But it goes further than that. He not only has declared us righteous for the sake of Christ, but He has also brought us into the very family of God. And that's what this question reminds us of. Adoption is an act of God's free grace, whereby we are received into the number and have a right to all the privileges of the sons of God. We have 3 points here in our answer which are similar to the some of the points, at least from last week. First of all, we have the act of adoption. Adoption is an act. It is something that God has done. Therefore we read in 1 John 3 verse 1, behold what manner of love the Father hath bestowed upon us, that we should be called the sons of God. This is not something that we cooperated with, not something that we had a part to play in. This was an act of God. Just like justification is an act of God, so is adoption. And it's an act that was done by God from the foundation of the world. Therefore we read in Ephesians 1 verse 5, having predestinated us unto the adoption of children by Jesus Christ to Himself, according to the good pleasure of His will. Now, just to refer you to our confession of faith, we won't read it. In our confession of faith, there is just one paragraph, and it's chapter 12, which deals with this subject of adoption. So in your own time, read chapter 12. And also, can I just remind you before we go further, please try and memorize, if you can, these questions and answers, and also, if you can, the proof text for each of the answers. So, adoption is an act. But then, secondly, we have the cause of adoption. Adoption is an act of God's free grace. We do not and did not deserve to be made the children of God. In fact, we know even today, if it was just based upon today, we know how little we deserve that. Our desires, our thoughts, our words, our actions, we do not deserve to be the children of God. Therefore it is based and it is grounded on the free grace of God. And we see in the phrase, it's not just grace, but it is God's free grace. Something that not only we do not deserve, but we could never earn. It is the free grace of God. Therefore in Galatians 4 and verses 4 and 5 we read, but when the fullness of the time was come, God sent forth His Son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law. Why? That we might receive the adoption of sons. So the act and the cause, and then we've got 2 parts for the last point, which is the benefits of adoption. And the 2 words that I would identify here is the word received and the word right. First of all, whereby we are received into the number. We are received into the number of God's sons. And therefore we read in in John chapter 1 and verse 12, as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name. So we received him, but we are received because of him. In fact, in receiving him, not because of what we do, and we know that from the very next verse in that chapter, we are received by him. Also, we read in 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 18, and I will be a father unto you, and ye should be my sons and daughters, saith the Lord Almighty. And Galatians 4 verse 6, and because ye are sons, God hath sent forth the Spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, Father. We are received into the number of God's sons, God's children. But then, not only that, but this word right. We have a right to all the privileges of the sons of God. It would be enough, wouldn't it? It would be sufficient to bless our hearts this night if we could say, I am one of God's children. But that's not all. We can say that we have a right to the privileges of the sons of God. Therefore we read in Romans chapter 8 and verse 17, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ, if so be that we suffer with him, that we may be also glorified together. So, what is adoption? Adoption is an act of God's free grace, whereby we are received into the number and have a right to all the privileges of the sons of God.